Elle will never forget the day my world crumbled. It started like any other. A mundane Tuesday filled with work emails, Jason's half-hearted attempts at homework, and the familiar hum of a coffee maker in the background. Nothing seemed off. Nothing warned me of the storm brewing in the distance. If I'd known, maybe I would have done something differently, though in hindsight, I doubt it. Some disasters are inevitable. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through bills on my laptop, when the notification popped up. Your balance has fallen below the minimum threshold, it read. That was odd. The college fund had more than enough in it. 6 years of careful saving for Jason's future. Laura and I had both agreed it was untouchable. It wasn't a conversation we needed to revisit because we both knew how much it meant. Or so I thought. I logged into the account, expecting to see some sort of mistake. Maybe a glitch? Banks mess up all the time, right? But no, the truth hit me like a freight train. The account was empty. Not low balance empty, but $0, 0 cents, no transactions in sight. I stared at the screen, the numbers burning into my eyes, hoping, praying. It was a joke, but it wasn't. Laura. I called, my voice shaky. No response. Laura. I tried again, louder this time. But the silence that answered was deafening. She wasn't home. That's when the sinking realization crept in. Laura had been acting strange for weeks. A little distant. A little too dressed up for her errands. Brushing off questions about where she was going with vague excuses. I chalked it up to stress, life, whatever. Never once had I thought. I grabbed my phone and dialed her number. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Same result. My heart was pounding now, every beat thudding in my chest like a drum. Jason wandered into the room, munching on an apple, oblivious to the chaos unraveling before him. Where's Mom? I asked, trying to sound calm for his sake. He shrugged, taking another bite. She said she had to go somewhere. Somewhere. That word felt like a dagger twisting in my gut. My hands were shaking as I opened our joint credit card account. Maybe I didn't want to see what I already suspected, but I couldn't stop myself. And there it was, transaction after transaction. Flights, luxury hotels, high-end restaurants. My wife was halfway across the country, living it up on money meant for our son's future. I didn't want Jason to see me fall apart, but it was hard. My mind raced with questions. How could she do this? How could she take from our son? From the one person who had nothing to do with our issues? Sure, we'd been arguing lately. Sure, things hadn't been perfect. But this was unforgivable. Jason must have noticed the look on my face because he came over and put a hand on my shoulder. Dad, it's fine, he said with a smile that was too calm, too knowing. I fixed everything. At the time, I thought he was just trying to make me feel better. Kids don't understand the weight of betrayal, the depth of loss. They see things in black and white, good guys and bad guys, problems and solutions. I wanted to believe his words were innocent. But even then, something about his tone felt off, like he knew more than he was letting on. I didn't have the energy to press him. My focus was on Laura. I tried calling again, but it was useless. It wasn't until later that night, when I checked the closet and saw her suitcase missing, that the truth hit me in full force. She wasn't coming back. She had emptied the account, packed her bags, and walked out on her family. On me. On Jason. The anger came in waves, each one more intense than the last. I wasn't just furious at her. I was furious at myself. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have let this happen under my nose? Every transaction, every lie, played on repeat in my mind like a cruel movie I couldn't turn off. Jason stayed quiet most of the evening, watching me with that same calm expression. When he finally went to bed, I sat alone in the dark, replaying the last few months, trying to find answers. But there weren't any. There was just a gaping hole where trust used to be, and a betrayal so deep it threatened to swallow me whole. I'd like to say I found some clarity that night, some resolve to move forward, but I didn't. All I found was the cold, bitter truth. The woman I loved had chosen herself over her family, and there was no coming back from that. What I didn't know, as I sat there drowning in my grief, was that Jason had already started working on a solution, one I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. The days following Laura's betrayal were a blur. I was barely functional, running on autopilot, consumed by anger, confusion, and heartbreak. But Jason? Jason was unshaken. If anything, he was eerily composed for a 10-year-old whose mother had just abandoned him. He still went to school, still did his homework, still played with his Legos like nothing had changed. At first, I chalked it up to shock. Kids process trauma differently, right? But the truth was, Jason wasn't ignoring the situation. He was working on it. It started small. I'd catch him typing furiously on his tablet, his face scrunched up in concentration. He'd glance at me and quickly minimize the screen, brushing it off with a casual, "Just homework, Dad." I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, he'd always been a whiz with technology, coding, gaming, whatever. It was his thing. But then there were the whispered phone calls. "Who are you talking to?" I asked one evening, catching him in the kitchen with the phone pressed to his ear. He looked startled, like a deer caught in headlights. Nobody," he said, shoving the phone into his pocket and hurrying out of the room. I didn't press him. I figured he was talking to a friend, or maybe even a counselor from school. Everyone handles grief differently, I told myself. Maybe this was his way of coping. Then there was the garage. Jason started spending hours in there, tinkering with tools and wires. I didn't pay much attention at first. I assumed he was working on one of his little engineering projects. He'd always been good at building things. Robots, model planes, stuff like that. But one night, curiosity got the better of me. I wandered into the garage to see what he was up to, and what I found stopped me cold. There was a whiteboard covered in diagrams, equations, and flowcharts. It looked like something out of a spy movie. Next to it was a laptop with lines of code scrolling across the screen. Jason was sitting at the workbench, soldering something that looked suspiciously like a listening device. When he saw me, he jumped up, trying to block the whiteboard with his small frame. "What's all this?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "Nothing, Dad. Just a project for school," he said, too quickly, too defensively. I raised an eyebrow. A school project? Since when does fourth grade require surveillance equipment? Jason's face turned red, and for a moment, I thought he might actually confess. But then he just shrugged and muttered, "You wouldn't get it," before packing up his tools and heading back inside. I stood there, staring at the whiteboard, my head spinning. Whatever Jason was working on, it wasn't for school, and it wasn't just a hobby. As the days went on, the strange behavior only escalated. Jason started asking oddly specific questions about Laura's finances. Did she have other accounts? Did I know her passwords? Did she ever talk about offshore investments? At first, I thought he was just being curious, but then I realized he was gathering information. "Why do you want to know all this?" I asked one evening. Jason shrugged, not looking up from his tablet. "No reason. Just wondering." "Jason," I said, my voice firm, "this isn't normal. If something's bothering you, you need to tell me." He finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "I told you, Dad. I'm fixing it. You'll see." That night, I couldn't sleep. Jason's words kept echoing in my mind. Fixing it? What could he possibly mean by that? I thought about confronting him, demanding answers, but something held me back. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was a small, irrational part of me that trusted him, trusted that he really did know what he was doing. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, typing away on his laptop. He didn't even notice me standing there, watching him. His fingers flew across the keyboard with the kind of confidence that didn't belong to a 10-year-old. "Jason," I said softly, and he froze. "Yeah, Dad?" I wanted to ask him what he was doing, what he was planning, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just said, "Breakfast is ready," and walked away. Looking back, I should have pressed him harder. I should have demanded to know what he was up to, but part of me didn't want to know. Part of me was afraid of what I might find out. Over the next few days, Jason's behavior became more secretive. He stopped leaving his tablet unattended. He locked the garage whenever he was working. He even started covering the whiteboard with a sheet when he wasn't using it. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself that it was all harmless, Laura called. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. I was standing by the kitchen sink, staring blankly out the window, still trying to piece my life back together. Jason was in the living room, playing on his tablet, completely immersed as usual. I glanced at the caller ID and froze. Laura. My first instinct was to let it ring. Why should I answer? What could she possibly say to justify what she'd done? But curiosity got the better of me, and against my better judgment, I picked up. What do you want? My voice was cold, sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. Alex, she cried, her voice frantic and trembling. Oh my God, Alex, you have to help me. Help her? The audacity of her request made my blood boil. Help you? I spat. You emptied our son's college fund and ran off with your boyfriend. Why on earth would I help you? Alex, please, just listen to me, she begged, her voice cracking. Something's gone wrong. Everything's gone wrong. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge to steady myself. What are you talking about? It's Damien, she said, almost sobbing now. He's gone. Just disappeared. All his accounts are frozen, and so are mine. I can't access anything, Alex. Nothing. And now the police are looking for me. Her words hit me like a slap, but it wasn't sympathy I felt. It was satisfaction. Cold, hard satisfaction. I wanted to ask her how it felt to be stranded, powerless, abandoned, the way she'd left Jason and me. But I stayed silent, letting her dig her own grave. Alex, please, she continued, her desperation growing. I don't know what's happening. I don't know who did this, but I need your help. I'm stuck in Miami with no money, no ID, nothing. Damien said he'd take care of everything, and now he's just gone. Sounds like a real stand-up guy, I said dryly, unable to resist the jab. She didn't even acknowledge it, too consumed by her panic. I swear, Alex, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You just what, Laura? I snapped, my anger finally boiling over. You just stole from your own son? You just walked out on your family for some guy who clearly doesn't give a damn about you? Is that what you didn't mean to happen? There was a long pause on the other end, broken only by the sound of her shaky breathing. I made a mistake, she whispered. A mistake? I barked out a bitter laugh. You don't get to call this a mistake, Laura. You made a choice, a selfish, cruel choice, and now you're paying for it. Alex, please, she said again, her voice barely audible. I have nothing. I don't know what to do. I need you. I opened my mouth to reply, but before I could, Jason appeared in the doorway, holding his tablet. Who's on the phone? He asked, his tone casual, as if this were any other day. I covered the receiver and whispered, It's your mom. Jason's face darkened for a brief moment, but then that same calm, knowing smile spread across his lips. Put it on speaker, he said. Jason, trust me, Dad. Put it on speaker. Something in his tone made me hesitate. This wasn't a request. It was a command. I didn't understand why, but I found myself obeying. I pressed the speaker button and set the phone down on the counter. Laura, I said, my voice hardening, you're on speaker now. Jason's here. There was a sharp intake of breath on her end. Jason, she said, her voice softening. Sweetheart, it's Mommy. Save it, Jason interrupted, his tone cold and emotionless. I don't want to hear it. Jason, please, she pleaded. I know I hurt you. I know I made a mistake, but you didn't just make a mistake, he said, cutting her off again. You betrayed us. You stole my future. And now you're calling us because you want our help? That's pathetic. I stared at him, stunned. This wasn't the voice of a 10-year-old. This was the voice of someone older, someone wiser, someone darker. Jason, Laura whispered, her voice breaking. I'm your mother. I love you. I didn't mean. You don't love me, he said bluntly. If you did, you wouldn't have left. You wouldn't have stolen from me. You chose Damien over us, and now you're paying the price. I don't feel sorry for you. You deserve this. Jason, please, she sobbed. I'm begging you. Please help me. He smiled then, a chilling, confident smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Don't worry, Mom, he said. I already did. What? She asked, her voice laced with confusion. Let's just say, he replied, his tone almost gleeful, Damien won't be around to hurt anyone anymore. And neither will you." The line went dead. I stood there, staring at Jason, my mind racing. "What did you do?" I whispered. He looked up at me, his eyes calm, almost proud. "I told you, Dad," he said. "I fixed everything." When Jason uttered those words, I fixed everything. I didn't know whether to feel proud, horrified, or completely confused. My 10-year-old son, standing there with that unnerving calmness, had just silenced his panicking mother with a cryptic remark that left me more unsettled than ever. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more absurd than the last. What could he have done? He's just a kid, right? "Jason," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean? You fixed everything. What did you do?" He shrugged casually, as if we were discussing his math homework. "It's like I said, Dad. Mom and Damien can't hurt us anymore." I felt my stomach twist into a knot. "Jason, this isn't a game. You need to tell me exactly what you've done." He sighed, like a parent indulging a child's endless questions, and motioned for me to follow him into the living room. "Okay, fine. I'll show you." We sat down on the couch, and he opened his tablet. The screen lit up with a dizzying array of charts, bank statements, and what looked like coding scripts. My pulse quickened as he started explaining, his voice calm and methodical, as if he were presenting a science project. "Remember how Mom drained my college fund?" he began. "Well, I figured if she could take the money, I could take it back." I stared at him, speechless, as he pulled up a series of bank transactions. Sure enough, the $50,000 Laura had stolen was back in the account. Not just sitting there, but reorganized and invested in a way that made my head spin. "How did you?" I stammered. "Easy," he said, as if hacking into bank accounts was as simple as tying his shoes. "Mom wasn't exactly careful with her passwords. I just used the ones she saved on her phone to access her accounts. Damien's, too. He wasn't any smarter. Once I was in, I transferred the money back to where it belongs." "That's illegal," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He shrugged again. "So is stealing from your kid." I couldn't argue with that, but my unease deepened as he continued scrolling. The bank transfers were just the beginning. Jason had done more. Much more. "Damien had a bunch of accounts in his name," Jason said, pointing to the screen. "Turns out, he's been scamming people for years. Fake investments, shell companies, stuff like that." I reported everything to the authorities. Gave them all the evidence they need to lock him up for good. "You reported him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yep. I even made sure the trail led back to Mom, too," he added, with a smirk that chilled me to the bone. "She helped him spend the money, so technically, she's part of the scam. Now the police are watching her, too." "Jason, do you understand what you've done?" I said, my voice rising. "This isn't just about getting the money back. You've put your mother in serious trouble." "She put herself in trouble," he shot back, his tone sharper now. "She chose Damien over us. She chose herself over us. Why should I feel sorry for her?" I didn't know how to respond. He was right, of course. Laura had betrayed us in the worst possible way. But hearing those words come from my son, delivered with such icy detachment, made my chest ache. This wasn't just a 10-year-old taking a stand. This was something darker. "And Damien?" I asked, dreading the answer. "What do you mean? He won't be around anymore?" Jason grinned. "Oh, don't worry. He's fine for now. He just doesn't have any money or anywhere to hide. The authorities froze all his accounts. By the time they find him, he'll be broke and in jail." The casual way he said it, as if destroying a man's life was no different than squashing a bug, sent a shiver down my spine. "Jason," I said, choosing my words carefully, "why didn't you tell me about this before? Why didn't you let me handle it?" He looked up at me, his expression suddenly softer. "Because I knew you wouldn't do anything. You just let her get away with it because you're too nice. Someone had to stop her, Dad. Someone had to protect us." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. My son, my sweet, brilliant boy, had taken it upon himself to not just fix our situation, but to exact revenge in a way I couldn't have dreamed of. I didn't know whether to be proud of his resourcefulness or terrified of what it meant. Jason, I said after a long pause, I'm not sure this is the right way to handle things. He tilted his head, his calm demeanor never wavering. Maybe not, but it worked. I leaned back on the couch, running a hand through my hair. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. My son had done what I couldn't, taken control of a hopeless situation and turned it on its head. But at what cost? Jason closed his tablet and looked at me with that same unnerving confidence. Don't worry, Dad, he said. Everything's going to be okay now. But as I sat there, staring at him, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from okay. I didn't sleep much after Jason's revelation. How could I? The sheer magnitude of what he'd done kept replaying in my mind, like a movie stuck on an endless loop. My son, a 10-year-old, had engineered a scheme so intricate, so devastating, that it left a grown man and woman completely ruined. And the worst part? He didn't seem to feel the slightest shred of guilt about it. I told myself I'd talk to him in the morning, but life had other plans. The phone rang again, Laura. My first instinct was to ignore it. After all, what could she possibly say that would change anything? But a small, masochistic part of me wanted to hear her squirm. So I answered. What? I barked, not bothering with pleasantries. Alex, please, she sobbed. I need your help. I'm begging you. The sound of her voice was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the confident, self-assured woman who had waltzed out of our lives without a second thought. In her place was someone desperate, broken. You've got some nerve calling me, I said coldly. Alex, listen to me, she said, her words tumbling out in a frantic rush. The police are after me. They froze all my accounts. Damien's gone, just vanished. I don't even know where he is. I'm stuck, Alex. I don't have any money. I don't have anywhere to go. And whose fault is that? I cut in, my voice rising. Alex, please, she cried. I know I messed up, okay? I know I hurt you and Jason, but I didn't deserve this. I don't deserve to be left with nothing. I let out a bitter laugh. You emptied our son's college fund, ran off with your boyfriend, and now you're crying because the consequences caught up to you? You do deserve this, Laura. Every last bit of it. There was silence on the other end, broken only by her shaky breathing. I didn't think it would get this bad, she whispered. You didn't think at all, I snapped. You were too busy living it up with Damien to care about what you left behind. Well, guess what, Laura? You made your bed. Now you get to lie in it. She started sobbing then, loud and uncontrollable. Alex, I'm begging you. Please, just help me get out of this mess. I don't have anyone else to turn to. I felt my jaw tighten. Anyone else to turn to? The sheer audacity of that statement made my blood boil. After everything she'd done, she had the gall to act like a victim, like I owed her anything. There's nothing I can do for you, I said flatly. Don't say that, she pleaded. You can talk to the police, tell them it was all Damien's fault. Because lying to cover for you worked out so well the first time, I said, cutting her off. No, Laura, I'm done cleaning up your messes. Alex, please, she shouted, her voice breaking. If not for me, then for Jason. Do it for him. That was the last straw. Don't you dare bring Jason into this, I said, my voice dangerously low. You don't get to play the concerned mother now, not after what you did to him. You made it perfectly clear where your priorities lie, and they weren't with your family. Alex, I'm sorry, she cried. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to be happy. Happy? I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. You think stealing from your son and running off with some loser was going to make you happy? Well, congratulations, Laura. You got what you wanted, and now you can deal with the consequences. There was another long silence, and for a moment, I thought she'd hung up. But then she spoke again, her voice small and broken. Is this really how it's going to be? She asked. You're just going to abandon me like this? The sheer irony of her words almost made me laugh. You abandoned us first, I said simply. And no, Laura, I'm not abandoning you. I'm just letting you deal with the mess you created. Goodbye. I hung up before she could say another word. When I turned around, Jason was standing in the doorway, watching me with that same calm, calculating expression. "You didn't let her off the hook, did you?" he asked. "No," I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "I didn't." He nodded, as if that was the only acceptable answer. "Good. She doesn't deserve our help." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't that simple, that no matter how much I hated Laura for what she'd done, a part of me still struggled with the idea of leaving her to fend for herself. But looking at Jason, at the steely resolve in his eyes, I knew he wouldn't understand. Or maybe he would, and that scared me even more. "Jason," I said carefully, "what you did, what you're doing, it's not normal. This isn't how a 10-year-old is supposed to think." "I'm not a normal 10-year-old, he said bluntly. I didn't have an answer to that. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that people like Damien don't just roll over when they're cornered. They lash out. They make noise. They take down as many people as they can on the way down. That's exactly what happened next. It started with a phone call. Not from Laura this time. No, I'd blocked her number. This one came from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I picked up, thinking maybe it was the authorities finally catching up to Damien. "Alex," the voice growled on the other end. Low, dangerous, and filled with venom. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" I froze. "Damien, Damien," I said, my voice flat. "Shouldn't you be in hiding by now?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, I'm in hiding, all right. Thanks to you and your little brat. You think you can ruin my life and just walk away?" I glanced toward the living room where Jason was sitting on the floor, calmly assembling a model car as if nothing in the world could touch him. For a moment, I considered denying everything, playing dumb. But what was the point? Damien already knew. "You got what you deserved," I said, keeping my tone even. "You stole from my family. You didn't think there'd be consequences?" "You don't know who you're dealing with," he snarled. "You think this is over? It's not over. Not by a long shot." "What are you going to do, Damien?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "You're broke. You're wanted. You're finished." "Maybe," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "But I'm not going down alone. I know where you live, Alex. I know where your son goes to school. And if you think I'm just going to sit back and let you ruin me, you're dead wrong." My blood ran cold. He wasn't bluffing. Damien was many things. A liar, a thief, a coward. But he wasn't the kind of man to make empty threats. "You stay away from my son," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts. "Or what?" he taunted. "You gonna sick your little hacker on me again? Go ahead. Let's see how far he's willing to go." I hung up before he could say another word. My hands were trembling as I set the phone down on the counter. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at it, trying to process what had just happened. "Who was that?" Jason asked, his voice startlingly calm. "Damien," I said, turning to face him. "He knows what you did, and now he's threatening us." Jason didn't even flinch. "Let him try," he said, his tone so cold it sent a shiver down my spine. "Jason, this isn't a game," I said, kneeling down in front of him. "This man is dangerous. We need to call the police." "No," Jason interrupted, his voice firm. "The police won't do anything until it's too late. But I can handle this." "Jason, Dad," he said, cutting me off again. "Trust me. I've got this." I wanted to argue, to tell him that this was too much for a 10-year-old to handle, that it wasn't his job to protect us. But the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't the look of a scared child. It was the look of someone who had already made up his mind. That night, Jason disappeared into the garage again, locking the door behind him. I didn't have the energy to stop him. I stayed up, pacing the living room, replaying Damien's words over and over in my head. Every noise outside made me jump. Every shadow felt like a threat. It wasn't until well past midnight that Jason finally emerged. He looked tired but satisfied, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "It's done," he said simply. "What's done?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. He handed me his tablet, and my heart sank as I read the screen. He'd tracked Damien's location using some kind of GPS spoofing software. Not only that, but he'd hacked into Damien's burner phone, recording every threatening message he'd sent. And then, to top it all off, Jason had sent an anonymous tip to the authorities with all the evidence they needed to arrest Damien. "Jason," I said, my voice a mixture of awe and disbelief, "do you have any idea what you've just done?" "I stopped him," he said matter-of-factly. "He can't hurt us now." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this was the end of it, that Damien would be caught and we'd finally be safe. But deep down, I knew better. People like Damien don't give up that easily. Sure enough, the next morning, I woke up to find a brick through our front window. Attached to it was a note, scrawled in messy, angry handwriting. "This isn't over." Jason found it before I did. He read it, crumpled it up, and tossed it in the trash without a word. "Jason," I said cautiously, "maybe we should leave. Go somewhere safe until this blows over." He looked up at me, his expression calm and unshaken. "We don't need to run, Dad. I have one more move to make." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "What do you mean, one more move?" He smiled then, a small, chilling smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "You'll see." I couldn't shake the unease that came with Jason's words. "You'll see." He said it so casually, so confidently, as if the chaos that had taken over our lives was nothing more than a game he was determined to win. But this wasn't a game. Not for me. Not when I'd spent the night cleaning up shattered glass and taping cardboard over the broken window, wondering if Damien would show up next with something worse than a brick. The next 2 days passed in tense silence. Jason went about his routine as though nothing had happened, but I could feel the gears turning in his mind. I didn't dare ask what he was planning. Part of me didn't want to know. I figured if I stayed out of it, maybe, just maybe, I could pretend my 10-year-old wasn't masterminding a battle against a grown criminal. Then it happened. It was late in the afternoon when the doorbell rang. My stomach sank. No one had come by in days, not since the brick, and I wasn't expecting anyone. Jason glanced up from his tablet, his face unreadable. "Don't answer it," I said instinctively, my voice low. Jason didn't reply. He just stood up, walked to the door, and peered through the peephole. Then, without hesitation, he unlocked it and swung it open. Standing there, larger than life and twice as angry, was Damien. His face was a twisted mask of fury, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He was a shadow of the smug, confident man I'd seen in old photos with Laura. This Damien looked desperate and dangerous. "Where is he?" Damien growled, stepping into the doorway without invitation. I moved to block his path, my heart pounding. "You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Damien sneered. "Oh, I'm not going anywhere. Not until your little brat explains how he ruined my life." Jason, to my horror, stepped forward. He was calm, almost bored, as he crossed his arms and stared up at Damien. "You did that all by yourself," Jason said evenly. Damien's jaw clenched. "Listen, you little—" "You're broke," Jason interrupted, his tone sharp and cutting. "You're wanted in 3 states. And now you're here, threatening me and my dad. Smart move." I reached for Jason, intending to pull him back, but he shook off my hand. "Jason, stop," I hissed. But Jason didn't stop. He stepped closer to Damien, his voice steady and cold. "You shouldn't have come here. You're just making things worse for yourself." Damien let out a bark of laughter. "Worse? Kid, I've got nothing left to lose." "That's where you're wrong," Jason said, his lips curling into a small, chilling smile. Before I could process what was happening, Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device, something I didn't recognize. He pressed a button, and suddenly, Damien's phone buzzed in his pocket. Damien frowned, pulling it out to see a series of files popping up on the screen. "What the hell is this?" Damien demanded. "Proof," Jason said simply. Damien's eyes flicked over the screen, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "You little—" "Proof that you're a threat," Jason continued, cutting him off. "Every message you've sent, every call you've made, every threat, you've left a trail. And now the authorities have it." Damien's face turned red. "You're bluffing." Jason tilted his head. "Am I?" In that moment, I realized what Jason had done. He hadn't just been gathering evidence. He'd been preparing a trap. Damien's phone wasn't just buzzing with files. It was streaming a live feed straight to local law enforcement. Jason had turned Damien's own threats into his downfall. Damien lunged forward, his face contorted with rage. But before he could take another step, the sound of sirens filled the air. Jason didn't flinch. "That'll be for you," he said calmly. Damien froze, his eyes darting toward the window. The flashing blue and red lights confirmed it. He turned back to Jason, his face a mix of fury and panic. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Jason replied, his voice cold and final. The police burst through the door moments later, their guns drawn. Damien didn't resist. He knew it was over. As they hauled him away, I stood there in stunned silence, trying to process everything that had just happened. Jason turned to me, his expression unreadable. "I told you I had one more move," he said quietly. "Jason," I said, my voice shaking, "do you have any idea how dangerous that was? He could have hurt you. He could have hurt both of us." "But he didn't," Jason said, his tone matter of fact. "And now he's gone." I wanted to yell at him, to demand answers, to make him understand that this wasn't normal, that this wasn't okay. But all I could do was stand there, staring at the boy who had just outmaneuvered a grown criminal. Jason looked up at me, his eyes calm but tired. "It's over now, Dad. We're safe." But as I stood there, watching the police car disappear down the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing about this was safe. The house was eerily quiet after Damien's arrest. The chaos, the threats, the lingering fear. All of it seemed to dissipate in an instant. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was heavy, suffocating, and filled with unspoken questions. Questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. I thought that was the end of it. Damien was out of our lives. Jason had gone back to his usual routine, and I could finally focus on rebuilding what little was left of our family. But then, Laura called. Again. I recognized the number immediately. I'd blocked her main line, but she must have found another way to contact me. I considered ignoring it. What more could she possibly say? But curiosity won out. I needed to hear it for myself. "What now, Laura?" I said, my tone colder than ice. Her voice was barely recognizable, weak and hoarse, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Alex," she began, but her words faltered. "I don't have time for your sob stories," I snapped. "If you're calling to beg for money or forgiveness, you're wasting your breath." "I don't want your money," she said quietly. I don't know what I want." That caught me off guard. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was no arrogance in her tone, no entitlement. Just raw, unfiltered defeat. "Then why are you calling?" I demanded. "I'm in trouble, Alex," she admitted. "Real trouble." "You don't say," I replied sarcastically. She ignored my jab. "The police, they're investigating me. They think I was part of Damien's scams." "Weren't you?" I asked, letting the accusation hang in the air. She hesitated. "I didn't know what he was doing at first," she said, her voice trembling. "But by the time I figured it out, it was too late. I was already tied to everything. And now they're freezing my accounts, seizing my assets. I have nothing, Alex. Nothing." "That makes two of us," I shot back. "Or did you forget that you wiped out Jason's college fund to finance your little adventure?" "I was stupid," she admitted, her voice breaking. I thought Damien loved me. I thought he'd take care of me." I let out a bitter laugh. "And how's that working out for you?" She didn't respond. The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "Why are you calling me, Laura?" I asked again, this time softer, though no less firm. "Because you're all I have left," she said quietly. "You and Jason." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Not because they moved me, no, far from it, but because of how delusional they were. "You don't have us," I said firmly. "You lost us the moment you chose Damien over your family." "Alex, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "I made a mistake. I know I messed up, but I'm still Jason's mother. I need a second chance." "Second chance?" I repeated, incredulous. "Laura, this isn't some minor slip-up. You stole from your own child. You abandoned him for a man you barely knew. And now that your perfect little fantasy has come crashing down, you want to come crawling back? No, absolutely not." Her sobs filled the line, but I didn't waver. I couldn't. "Alex, I don't have anywhere else to go," she said, desperation seeping into every word. "That's not my problem," I replied coldly. "What about Jason?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Doesn't he deserve to have his mother in his life?" "Jason doesn't need you," I said bluntly. "He's done more for this family in the past 2 weeks than you ever have. And he's done it without you. We don't need you, Laura. Not anymore." The line went silent. For a moment, I thought she'd hung up. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "So that's it?" she asked. "You're just going to turn your back on me?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You turned your back on us first, and now you're reaping what you sowed." She didn't respond. I heard her breathing, shaky and uneven, and then the call disconnected. When I turned around, Jason was standing in the doorway, watching me with that same calm expression he always wore. "Was that Mom?" he asked. I nodded. What did she want? "To come back," I said simply. Jason didn't flinch. "Did you tell her no?" "I did." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. She doesn't deserve to come back." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't that simple, that forgiveness was supposed to be part of the process. But looking at him, so composed, so sure, I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Maybe he was right. Maybe some things really were unforgivable. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop replaying everything Jason had done, everything he had orchestrated. It was impossible not to marvel at his brilliance. A 10-year-old had managed to outwit grown adults, dismantle a criminal scheme, and save his family from ruin, all while keeping an unnerving level of composure. It was impressive, no doubt about it, but it was also terrifying. Jason didn't act like a normal child. He didn't respond to situations with fear or hesitation. Instead, he calculated, strategized, and executed with precision. It was as if every decision he made was part of a grand chess game only he could see. And while I couldn't deny the effectiveness of his actions, I couldn't ignore the coldness behind them. One evening, as I sat on the couch staring at the cardboard over the window, Jason came into the room. He had that same calm, confident expression he always wore, but there was something different about his eyes, something heavier. "Dad," he said, sitting down beside me, "are you mad at me?" The question caught me off guard. "Mad at you? For what?" "For everything I did," he said simply. "For going after Mom and Damien. For not telling you." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. How could I even begin to answer that? "Jason," I started carefully, "what you did. It's not something a 10-year-old should ever have to do. It's not something anyone should have to do." "But I did it," he said, his tone unflinching. "And it worked." "It did," I admitted. "But it's not just about whether it worked. It's about what it means." He frowned. "What do you mean?" I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Jason, the way you handled things, it wasn't normal. It wasn't healthy. You shouldn't have to think like that, to act like that. You're just a kid." His expression didn't change. "I did what needed to be done. If I hadn't, who would have stopped them?" I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't his responsibility, that I should have been the one to handle it. But deep down, I knew he was right. I had been paralyzed by anger and grief, too caught up in my own pain to act. Jason had stepped in because I hadn't, and that realization cut deeper than anything else. "You're smart, Jason," I said after a long pause. "Smarter than I'll ever be. But you're also my son, and it's my job to protect you, not the other way around." He looked at me then, his eyes searching mine. "But what if you can't?" he asked softly. "What if it's up to me?" I didn't have an answer. How could I, when the evidence was staring me in the face? Jason had protected us. He had saved us. But at what cost? In the weeks that followed, life slowly began to return to normal. Or at least, as normal as it could be. Damien was behind bars, and Laura had gone silent, likely too caught up in her own legal troubles to bother us anymore. The house was quiet, peaceful even, but that peace felt fragile, like a thin sheet of glass ready to shatter at the slightest touch. One afternoon, I found Jason in the garage, tinkering with a new project. It was a drone, sleek and meticulously built, with wires and circuits laid out in perfect order. He looked up when I entered, offering a small smile. "Hey, Dad," he said. "What's up?" I leaned against the doorway, watching him work. "You're always building something, aren't you?" He shrugged. "I like it. It keeps my mind busy." "That's a good thing," I said carefully. "But Jason, you don't always have to be fixing things. Sometimes, it's okay to let things just be." He didn't respond right away. Instead, he focused on soldering a tiny wire, his hands steady and precise. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "I don't know how to do that." "What do you mean?" He set down the soldering iron and looked at me, his expression serious. "I don't know how to just let things be. If something's broken, I have to fix it. If there's a problem, I have to solve it. It's just how I think." I wanted to tell him that he didn't have to carry that burden, that it wasn't his responsibility to fix everything. But I knew better. Jason wasn't like other kids. He saw the world differently, and no amount of reassurance from me would change that. "You've got a gift, Jason," I said finally, "but it's also a responsibility. You're going to have to decide how to use it and who to trust with it." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "I know." I watched him for a moment longer, my chest tight with a mixture of pride and worry. Jason was brilliant, no question about it. But brilliance could be a double-edged sword. It could build or destroy, heal or hurt. And I could only hope that, as he grew, he would choose to build. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Laura's final words to me. "You raised a son who doesn't just survive, he conquers. But be careful, Alex. One day, his heart might be too cold to save." I didn't want to believe her, but the thought lingered. Jason was more than just a survivor. He was a force to be reckoned with. And while I was proud of him, I couldn't shake the fear that his brilliance, unchecked, might one day lead him down a path I couldn't follow. For now, though, we had peace. And I was determined to protect it, for both our sakes. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The day I dreamed about since I first met Sienna. The woman who had stolen my heart with her laughter, her charm, and the way she made even the simplest moments feel special. Standing at the altar, surrounded by family, friends, and the kind of expensive decor that made my bank account wince, I thought I had everything I ever wanted. The ceremony had been perfect so far. The venue was a grand estate, the kind you see in those luxury wedding magazines, all polished marble and chandeliers that cost more than a year's rent. Sienna had insisted on the best of everything: designer floral arrangements, a string quartet, a 5-course meal. And I, eager to make her happy, had agreed to it all. Because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You give them the world. I remember standing there, heart pounding, hands slightly clammy despite my confidence. Sienna stood across from me, breathtaking in a lace gown that hugged her body perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, her hair styled in soft waves, and when she smiled, it was enough to make any man weak in the knees. Then, just as the officiant was about to start, she leaned in close enough that only I could hear what she said. "You have to pay me your $7,490 monthly salary, or I will marry your handsome, rich brother." I thought I misheard her. The words didn't make sense. The sentence was clear, the intent unmistakable, but my brain refused to process it. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe she was nervous and saying nonsense to keep herself from breaking down in tears. But when I pulled back and looked at her, I saw none of that. No hesitation. No nervous giggle. No indication that this was anything but cold, calculated reality. I stared at her, my chest tightening as my heartbeat slammed in my ears. She was serious. She wanted my entire paycheck every month, as a condition of this marriage. And if I didn't agree, she had a backup plan. My own brother, Lucas. He was standing there in the front row, looking effortlessly put together as always. Taller than me, lean, well-dressed, and annoyingly charismatic. The kind of guy who never had to try too hard. He had always been the golden child of the family, the one who got away with everything, the one my parents constantly compared me to. If he failed, it was a learning experience. If I failed, it was disappointing. I had spent my whole life trying to step out of his shadow, trying to prove I was just as capable, just as worthy of attention. And now, here was my bride, my supposed soulmate, using him as leverage against me. For a split second, I felt sick, not just with anger, not just with betrayal, but with the sheer absurdity of it all. Was I really standing at my own wedding being blackmailed? Was this really happening? I forced myself to breathe, to stay calm. My first instinct was to lash out, to demand an explanation, to tell her that she was out of her mind. But I didn't. Not yet. Because the last thing I wanted was to make a scene, to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack in front of everyone. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and looked her dead in the eye. No. One word. Firm. Unshaken. Sienna blinked. Just once. Then, in the most graceful, fluid movement I'd ever seen, she turned her head toward Lucas. "Lucas," she said sweetly, her voice carrying through the hushed room. "I think I made a mistake. I should be marrying you." The crowd gasped. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave crashing against the shore. I expected Lucas to be shocked, to laugh it off, to shake his head and say, "Nice try, Sienna." But he didn't. He smiled. Smiled. Like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. Without a moment's hesitation, he took a step forward. And with that single step, my world shifted. This wasn't just about Sienna. This wasn't some impulsive, last-minute decision. This had been planned. I looked at my parents, expecting outrage, expecting them to defend me, to shut this insanity down. Instead, my mother was dabbing at imaginary tears, whispering something to my father. My father? He was nodding, approving. I felt my pulse roar in my ears as realization set in. They were fine with this. More than fine. They were happy about it. Lucas had always been their golden boy, their pride and joy. If they had a choice between their successful, charming eldest son and the man standing at the altar, the one they never quite deemed good enough, they were always going to choose him. I was nothing more than a placeholder until a better option came along. A bitter laugh nearly escaped my throat, but I swallowed it down. I had spent years, my whole life even, proving I was worthy, proving I was enough. And for what? To be tossed aside at my own wedding like a disposable napkin? I took a step back, then another. The officiant was speechless, the guests confused. The air was thick with tension, waiting for me to react, to explode. But I didn't give them the satisfaction. I turned, and without another word, I walked away. Out of the venue, out of their lives, out of the trap they had set for me. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I was done. I kept walking. I didn't know where I was going, and I didn't care. All I knew was that I had to get out of there, away from them, away from the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. My wedding. My wedding. And yet, it felt like some twisted nightmare playing out in slow motion. I could still hear the gasps of the guests, feel the burning stares of the people I had trusted, the ones I had let into my life. But most of all, I could hear her voice. Sienna's voice, smooth and confident, calling out to Lucas like she had just decided to change dinner reservations instead of abandoning her groom at the altar. "Lucas, I think I made a mistake. I should be marrying you." That sentence kept repeating in my head, like a broken record that wouldn't stop skipping. And the worst part? Lucas hadn't even hesitated. I had expected shock, awkward laughter, maybe even an attempt to defuse the situation. Instead, he had stepped forward like he had been waiting for that moment his entire life. Because he had. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't some last-minute crisis of conscience on Sienna's part. This was a setup. How long had they planned this? How long had they been waiting for the moment to drop this bomb on me? Was it before the engagement? After? Had my parents known all along? Or had they just gone along with it the moment Lucas agreed? I clenched my fists. I could feel the nails digging into my palms, grounding me in a way that the rest of my body refused to. For a brief second, I considered turning back. Not to beg, never that, but to demand answers. To get in Lucas's face, to grab Sienna by the wrist and make her tell me exactly when she had decided that I was just a stepping stone toward the life she really wanted. But then I pictured the smirk on Lucas's face. The way he had stepped forward with that easy confidence, as if he had always known he was the better option. The way my mother had dabbed at her eyes, not from sadness, but from joy. The way my father had nodded in approval, like this was just another smart business decision. And I knew I would never get the answers I wanted, because none of them saw me as someone worth answering to. I kept walking. The streets were quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. A wedding venue filled with gasping guests, stunned silence, and a bride who had thrown her own vows out the window like they meant nothing. Because they hadn't. Sienna had never meant them. And Lucas had never once been on my side. I should have known. The signs had been there, scattered like puzzle pieces I had refused to put together. The way Sienna would always light up when Lucas was around. The way my parents always seemed warmer, happier, whenever Lucas was the one talking. The way I had always been just a little bit less, a little bit second place, even when it came to my own life. I had ignored it, chosen to believe that love and family meant something more. That was my mistake. I stopped at a quiet cafe on the corner of the street, the kind of place that always smelled like freshly brewed coffee and warm bread. The kind of place where, for a few minutes, you could pretend the world outside didn't exist. I needed that. I stepped inside, ordered something. I didn't even register what, and found a seat in the back, away from the windows, away from anyone who might recognize me. My phone buzzed. I ignored it. It buzzed again. I didn't even need to check the screen to know who it was. I stared at the black surface of my coffee, my reflection distorted in the ripples. How many times had I imagined this day? Not like this, of course. In my version, Sienna and I would be laughing, hands intertwined, celebrating the start of our new life. Lucas would be there, of course, because why wouldn't he be? He was my brother. He was supposed to be family. My parents would be proud. My friends would be cheering, and I would finally feel like I belonged. But that was never going to happen. Not then. Not now. Not ever. The phone buzzed again, longer this time. A call. I let it ring. Eventually, curiosity got the best of me. I pulled the phone out of my pocket and glanced at the screen. Sienna. My grip tightened around the device. My instinct was to toss it across the room, let it shatter into as many pieces as she had left my pride in. But instead, I just watched it ring until it stopped. A few seconds later, a message appeared. Come back, please. I exhaled, a humorless chuckle escaping before I could stop it. She thought I would come back. She thought I was still that guy, the one who would swallow his pride, forgive the unforgivable, and let himself be played one more time. She didn't know me at all. The phone buzzed again. Another message. It's not what you think. Just come back. I'll explain everything. Explain? What was there to explain? Had she momentarily lost her mind? Had she been possessed at the altar, spouting nonsense she didn't mean? Had she been pressured into making the worst decision of her life? No. Sienna didn't make mistakes. She made choices. Calculated, strategic choices. And she had chosen Lucas. I took one last sip of my coffee, letting the bitterness settle in my mouth before I set the cup down and got up. I wasn't going back. There was nothing left for me there. But for some reason, I still couldn't bring myself to block her number. Not yet. I didn't go back. Not to the venue. Not to my family. Not to the mess I had left behind. I walked out of that wedding and never looked back. And yet, the weight of it clung to me like a second skin. It didn't matter how far I walked or how many blocks I put between myself and the disaster. I could still hear Sienna's voice, still see the smug look on Lucas's face, still feel the silent approval radiating from my parents. They had all played their parts so perfectly. I had been the only fool in the room. I kept moving, letting my feet take me wherever they wanted. My tuxedo jacket felt suffocating, so I pulled it off and tossed it onto a bench, not caring who picked it up. The tie came next, yanked loose and stuffed into my pocket. My head was spinning, my chest tight. It was as if my body hadn't quite caught up to the fact that it was all over, that I wasn't married, that the woman I loved had sold me out for something shinier, that my own brother had stepped into my place without a second thought. I walked for hours. I ignored the buzzing in my pocket. Sienna was still trying to reach me. So was my mother. I stopped at a convenience store, grabbed a bottle of water, and caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the glass doors. I barely recognized the man staring back. The perfectly groomed hair now slightly disheveled. The crisp white dress shirt wrinkled. The exhaustion in my eyes so obvious it looked like I hadn't slept in days. I had gone to that wedding expecting a celebration. I had walked out of it looking like I had just survived a war. And in a way, I had. After paying for the water, I stepped outside, leaning against the side of the building. A couple walked past me, hand in hand, laughing about something private between them. A pang of something sharp twisted in my gut. That was supposed to be me. I was supposed to be somewhere else right now, probably on a dance floor, holding my wife close, whispering promises about our future together. I was supposed to be smiling, surrounded by friends and family, celebrating the start of something beautiful. Instead, I was here, alone. It was funny, in a cruel way. I had spent so much of my life trying to prove myself, trying to show my parents I was just as worthy as Lucas, trying to show Sienna that I could be everything she ever wanted, trying to build something real, something stable, something that mattered. And in the end, none of it had mattered at all. I laughed, a low, humorless sound that probably made me look slightly unhinged to the people passing by. But I didn't care, because what else was there to do but laugh? What else was left when everything had already fallen apart? My phone buzzed again. I finally pulled it out of my pocket, half expecting to see another message from Sienna, some weak excuse or attempt to pull me back in. But it wasn't her this time. It was Lucas. I stared at the screen for a long moment, debating whether or not to answer. And then, before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed accept. For a second, there was silence. Then, his voice calm and casual, as if nothing had happened. "Brother, where did you run off to?" I exhaled slowly, gripping the phone tighter. "What do you want, Lucas? You disappeared before the real party started. Thought you'd at least stick around to see how it all played out." The smugness in his voice was unbearable. He was enjoying this. He wanted me to react, to yell, to curse his name. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I had better things to do. Lucas chuckled. "Come on, don't be like that. You always take things so personally. It's just business, you know?" "Business?" I repeated, barely keeping my temper in check. "Is that what you call stealing my fiancé at the altar?" Look, Sienna made her choice. I didn't force her. And let's be honest, did you really think she was going to settle for you when she could have more? There it was. The truth, laid out in the open. I had never been enough. Not for my parents. Not for Sienna. Not even in my own brother's eyes. So what now? I asked, my voice eerily calm. "You think you're going to live happily ever after?" Lucas was silent for a beat too long. "Well, we'll see, won't we?" I smirked. "Yeah, we will." Then, without another word, I hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand, resisting the urge to throw it into the street and watch it shatter. Lucas had won. For now. But the thing about people like Lucas and Sienna, they always thought they were invincible. They always thought they were too smart, too charming, too untouchable to face consequences. They were wrong. I wasn't going to be the fool who sat back and let them enjoy the spoils of their betrayal. They had made their move. Now it was my turn. I stood up, shoved my phone back into my pocket, and started walking again. This time with purpose. I didn't know exactly what my next step was going to be, but I did know one thing for certain. I was done being the guy everyone underestimated. I was halfway through a bottle of whiskey when my phone started buzzing again. It had been a couple of hours since I left the wedding, and by now, the shock had begun to fade, replaced by something colder, something sharper. I had spent my entire life believing in love, in family, in loyalty. Tonight had shattered those illusions into a million irreparable pieces. The wedding venue, the guests, my brother, my parents, Sienna. All of it felt like a bad dream I had walked away from. I wasn't even sure where I was anymore. Some dive bar tucked away in a quiet corner of the city, dimly lit. The kind of place where no one asked questions. A perfect place for someone who didn't want to be found. And yet, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Sienna. She had called over a dozen times already. At first, I ignored it. Then I muted it. Then I put it face down on the bar, hoping that if I didn't see it, I could pretend it wasn't happening. But the buzzing continued, insistent and frantic. vibrating against the wooden surface like an alarm I couldn't shut off. I sighed, picking it up, and for the first time that night, I hesitated. What was I expecting? An apology? An excuse? Another insult disguised as an explanation? She had humiliated me in front of everyone. She had whispered those poison-laced words into my ear and, without missing a beat, had replaced me with my own brother like I was nothing. So why was she calling? I stared at her name flashing on the screen, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But something about the sheer desperation of her repeated calls made me pause. I exhaled sharply, then finally swiped to answer. For a second, there was silence. Just the sound of shallow, uneven breathing. Then, her voice. Panicked, frantic. Nothing like the woman who had smirked at me hours earlier. "You have to come back," she gasped. I leaned back in my seat, swirling the whiskey in my glass. Why would I do that? "Please, I swear. Just come back. You don't understand. Something went wrong." Something about the raw fear in her voice gave me pause. I had expected arrogance, maybe even a half-hearted attempt to manipulate me into feeling sorry for her. But this was something else. "What went wrong, Sienna?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, controlled. She didn't answer right away. In the background, I could hear chaos. Voices raised in anger, guests murmuring in confusion, the unmistakable sound of something shattering. Then she whispered, "Lucas is gone." I sat up a little straighter. Gone? He left. He just walked out. He was supposed to sign the papers, and then he just disappeared. He's not answering his phone, and I don't know what to do. I closed my eyes, letting the moment sink in. I should have felt something. Anger, satisfaction, maybe even the faintest hint of schadenfreude. But all I felt was a slow, dull realization settling over me like a heavy blanket. Lucas had done exactly what I should have expected him to do. He had left her, just like she had left me. "Well," I said finally, taking another sip of my drink, "looks like you made a bad bet." "Don't do this," she pleaded. "I need you. Please, just come back. We need to fix this." "There's no we anymore, Sienna." She made a strangled noise, something between frustration and despair. "You don't get it. My parents, your parents, everyone is watching. I can't just be left like this. You have to come back." And there it was. The real reason behind her desperation. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about love. It was about saving face. She had built this perfect, polished image of herself. The bride in the designer dress. The woman who had flawlessly transitioned from one brother to the next like she was trading in an old car for a newer model. And now, with Lucas gone, she was standing there, exposed, humiliated, alone. For the first time that night, I smiled. A slow, dark smile that I knew she could hear in my voice when I finally responded. "Enjoy the wedding, Sienna. Hope you like standing at the altar all by yourself." Then I hung up. I set my phone down, exhaling as I stared at the ice melting in my glass. So that was it. Lucas had left. Sienna had lost. And for the first time all night, I felt something dangerously close to peace. But as I finished my drink, a thought crept into my mind. Lucas walking away didn't make sense. He wasn't the type to back out of a deal unless something better was waiting for him. So where had he gone? And what the hell was he planning next? I should have gone home. I should have turned my phone off, gotten some sleep, and let the whole mess unravel without me. But something gnawed at me, something about the way Sienna had sounded. It wasn't just panic, it was fear. And if there was one thing I knew about Lucas, it was that he didn't inspire fear in women. Not the way a normal man would. He wasn't violent. He wasn't reckless. No, Lucas was something much worse. He was calculated, which meant that if he left, he had a reason. I tossed a few bills on the bar, grabbed my jacket, and walked out into the night, my head still buzzing from the whiskey. I hailed a cab, gave the driver the name of the venue, and spent the entire ride trying to convince myself that I didn't care. That I wasn't going back because I still had feelings for Sienna. That I wasn't doing this because, deep down, I wanted her to tell me I had been the right choice all along. I was going back because I wanted to see the wreckage. And when I stepped out of the car, that's exactly what I found. The once grand wedding hall, the one I had paid for, now looked like the aftermath of a storm. Guests were scattered in clusters, whispering behind their hands, some already filing out the front doors like they wanted to escape before the next disaster hit. Inside, the flowers that had once adorned the tables were now crushed on the floor, trampled in the chaos. A glass had been knocked over near the buffet, red wine bleeding across the expensive white tablecloths like an omen. At the center of it all was Sienna. She stood near the altar, still in her pristine white dress, but the confidence, the arrogance, that had once radiated off her was gone. She looked abandoned. And the best part? My parents stood beside her. Their perfect son, their golden boy, had humiliated them all. I stepped forward, and every head in the room turned toward me. Sienna's eyes locked onto mine, wide, desperate. She rushed toward me, grasping my arm before I could stop her. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. I just stared at her. "Where is he?" Her breath hitched. I don't know. He just walked out. Right before we were supposed to sign the marriage certificate. He didn't say a word. He just left. I almost laughed. Lucas. That bastard. He had played her like a game of chess. He had let her humiliate me. Let her believe she had won. Let our parents eat up every second of their grand betrayal. And then he had walked away. Because why settle for her when he could have something better? I pulled my arm free. "And you thought I would come back to clean up the mess?" She flinched. "I know. I didn't know who else to call." I glanced around the room, making sure everyone could hear me. "Why don't you ask my parents?" I gestured toward them. After all, they were perfectly fine with switching out their sons for the highest bidder. "Maybe they can find you a third option." My mother gasped. My father's expression darkened. But before either of them could speak, a new voice cut through the silence. "Lucas isn't coming back." We all turned. At the back of the room stood a woman. Tall, elegant, and furious. I had never seen her before, but the second Sienna went pale, I knew exactly who she was. Lucas's real fiancée. The one Sienna had never known about. The woman stormed forward, her heels clicking against the floor with each step, her face set in a cold mask of fury. "You think Lucas wanted to marry you?" she sneered at Sienna. "You were a joke to him, a distraction. The second he got what he wanted, he left. Just like that." Sienna's lips parted, but no sound came out. I turned to my parents, wanting to see their reaction to their perfect son's latest disaster. They looked horrified, because it wasn't just about Lucas leaving. It was about their reputation. They had orchestrated this wedding, had stood behind Lucas, had betrayed their own son for a son-in-law who had just publicly humiliated them all. And I was the only one still standing, the only one who hadn't been played. The silence stretched between us all, thick with tension, with realization, with defeat. Then, finally, I exhaled, stepped back, and said the only thing that made sense. "Looks like the wedding's over." And then I walked away. Again. This time, for good. I was almost out the door when I heard my mother's voice behind me. Wait. I didn't. I had already walked away from this mess once. I had already been humiliated, cast aside, used as a stepping stone for my brother's ambitions and Sienna's greed. There was nothing left for me here. No apology, no explanation, no excuse that would undo the betrayal I had endured. But then I heard my father's voice, low and unsteady. "We were wrong." That made me stop. Not because I wanted to hear them out, but because in all my years, I had never once heard my father admit he was wrong. Not about business, not about family, and certainly not about Lucas. I turned around slowly, hands in my pockets, my expression unreadable. "What was that?" I asked, my voice flat. My father, the man who had spent my entire life looking at me like I was second best, exhaled deeply. His face, usually hard and composed, was tight with discomfort. My mother, standing next to him, dabbed at the corner of her eye with a silk handkerchief. Whether it was genuine or just for show, I didn't care. "We made a mistake," he repeated, glancing toward the stunned crowd, as if the weight of what had just happened was finally sinking in. I gave him a slow, humorless nod. "Yeah, you did." The words felt good. Sienna stood between them, her hands trembling at her sides. I could see it now, the cracks forming in her perfect exterior, the realization setting in that she had played the wrong game and lost spectacularly. She had been so sure of herself, so convinced she could manipulate her way into my family's wealth. And for a moment, it had worked. Until Lucas had pulled the ultimate con. He had never intended to marry her. The truth was still settling over everyone like a thick fog. The guests, once whispering in scandalous delight, now stared in open horror at the sheer scale of the disaster unfolding before them. And standing at the very center of it all was Sienna, abandoned at the altar for the second time in a single night. She looked at me then, a mix of shame, desperation, and something dangerously close to regret. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I swear, I didn't know about her. About his fiancée." I tilted my head. "And I'm supposed to feel sorry for you?" She flinched. I stepped closer, just enough that only she could hear me. "You thought you were playing him, but Lucas was playing you, and you didn't even see it coming." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly as if trying to push back the tears welling in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you," she whispered. I almost laughed. "You whispered at the altar that if I didn't give you my salary, you'd marry my brother instead," I said, my voice calm, deliberate. "You didn't just mean to hurt me, Sienna. You planned it." She shook her head quickly. "I thought it would be different. You thought Lucas would stay." I cut her off. "That's what this is really about, isn't it? You don't care about me. You never did. But him leaving? That wasn't in your script." She bit her lip, her hands curling into fists. "He told me we'd be together. He told me." Lucas tells a lot of people a lot of things. A choked sound escaped her, half a sob, half a bitter laugh. I could see it now, the storm raging inside her. The perfect life she had envisioned, slipping through her fingers. And the best part? She had no one to blame but herself. I turned my attention back to my parents, who were still standing there, still trying to salvage whatever dignity they had left. "So," I said, shifting my weight, "what happens now?" My mother cleared her throat delicately. We will find a way to fix this." "Fix what?" I asked. "Your golden son just humiliated you in front of everyone. He abandoned the bride you wanted for him. And now, the whole city is going to be talking about this disaster for weeks. So tell me, Mom, what exactly do you plan on fixing?" She opened her mouth, then closed it, looking to my father as if hoping he had an answer. He didn't. Because there wasn't one. This was their mess. And for the first time, they had to sit in it. I could have stayed. I could have watched them scramble, watched Sienna try to pick up the pieces of her broken fairy tale. But I had wasted enough time on people who had proven they weren't worth it. So I gave my parents one last look, then turned to Sienna. "Good luck with that wedding," I said, voice dripping with mock sympathy. "I hear third time's the charm." Then, without waiting for a response, I walked out the door. And this time, I didn't look back. I walked away from that disaster, but the echoes of it followed me. The gasps, the murmurs, the weight of Sienna's stunned silence, my mother's helpless attempts to salvage the wreckage, my father's cold acceptance of his own humiliation. It all played in my head like a badly edited film. But the one thing that stuck with me the most? The truth. Lucas had never intended to marry Sienna. That part wasn't even a surprise. No, the real surprise was that my so-called golden brother had been engaged the entire time, to a woman none of us even knew about. And Sienna? She had been a side game, a backup plan, a spare. That thought alone should have made me feel better, should have given me the satisfaction of knowing that Sienna's betrayal had come full circle, that she had gotten exactly what she deserved. But instead, I just felt numb, because none of it should have happened in the first place. I should have seen it coming, should have known that my parents would pick Lucas over me, should have recognized that Sienna had been playing a different game all along. But I didn't, and that stung. I made it halfway down the street when my phone buzzed in my pocket again. I glanced at it, fully expecting yet another desperate call from Sienna or, worse, my mother trying to do damage control. But it wasn't either of them. It was her, Lucas's secret fiancée, the woman who had stormed into the wedding, and shattered the last piece of Sienna's illusion. I debated ignoring it, but something about her walking into that room with more rage than I had ever seen in my life made me press accept. "I was hoping you'd answer," she said immediately. I leaned against a street lamp, my fingers tightening around the phone. "And why's that?" "Because you're the only one who got played just as badly as I did." I exhaled sharply. "You knew about me, didn't you?" "Not at first," she admitted. "But then I started noticing things. Lucas disappearing for days at a time, taking calls he didn't want me to hear. And then, the receipts. Receipts. Hotel bookings. Restaurant bills. Jewelry purchases I never got. It didn't take me long to figure out there was someone else. I just didn't know it was your fiancé until about a week ago." I rubbed a hand over my face. "A week ago?" "Yeah. That's when I found out they were planning to replace you at the altar." I froze. "Wait. You heard me. You're saying Lucas knew about this weeks before the wedding?" "Of course he did. Why do you think he played along?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Lucas never does anything unless it benefits him." I stared at the pavement, my stomach twisting. Lucas hadn't just taken advantage of an opportunity when Sienna called out to him at the altar. He had known it was going to happen. This wasn't just a last-minute betrayal. It had been planned. The realization settled over me like a heavy weight. "How long have you been engaged to him?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "Almost 2 years," she said, and something in her voice cracked. 2 years, and he let me walk into that room thinking we had a future. Let me stand there, knowing that I was about to watch him marry someone else. She went silent for a moment. "I almost didn't go," she admitted. "But then I thought, why should he get to control the story? Why should he get to humiliate me in private while pretending he's the perfect son in public?" I exhaled slowly. "So you made sure everyone knew the truth?" "Damn right I did." For the first time that night, I felt something other than anger. Respect. Because I had walked away. But she had burned everything down on her way out. "So what now?" I asked. She sighed. "Now? Now I make sure he pays." "You?" I looked around at the city lights, the streets stretching endlessly in both directions. "Now I move on." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She hummed. "Wish I could do the same." "Why can't you?" "Because unlike you, I don't just want to walk away. I want him to feel what I felt. I want him to lose everything the way I did. And trust me, Lucas has a lot more to lose than you." I almost smiled. "Sounds like you've got a plan." "Oh, I do. Good luck then." She hesitated. "You too." Then she hung up. I slid my phone back into my pocket and stood there for a moment, breathing in the cool night air. Lucas had made his move. Sienna had made hers. Now, it was my turn. I had wasted enough time trying to prove myself to people who didn't deserve it. It was time to prove something else. That I didn't need any of them. That I would be just fine on my own. And that no one, not Sienna, not Lucas, not even my parents, was ever going to use me again. I had walked away from that disaster of a wedding, but the weight of it still clung to me like a second skin. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer absurdity of the whole situation. It wasn't something I could just shake off. I had spent years thinking I was building something real. I had poured everything into my relationship with Sienna, trusting her, believing we had a future. And in the end, all I had been was a stepping stone to a life she thought she deserved more than me. And Lucas? He had taken what was mine just because he could, just because he knew he could get away with it. But now, for the first time, he had lost. And Sienna had lost too. She just didn't want to accept it yet. That became obvious when my phone buzzed again, her name flashing across the screen. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in me wanted to hear what she had to say. So I picked up. "You have 10 seconds before I hang up?" She let out a shaky breath. "Please, don't. I need to talk to you." "Why?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "So you can explain how you were just confused? How you didn't mean to destroy everything? Spare me, Sienna. I didn't mean for it to happen like this." "Like this?" I let out a humorless laugh. "So what? You thought you'd marry Lucas and I'd just sit there and smile in the audience? Clap politely as you replaced me at the altar? No. She hesitated, then exhaled. I don't know what I thought, okay? I made a mistake. A mistake? My grip on the phone tightened. You didn't forget to send an email, Sienna. You planned this. You whispered in my ear at the altar that if I didn't give you my salary, you'd marry my brother instead. That's not a mistake. That's who you are. Silence. I could hear her breathing, could feel the weight of her shame through the phone. Then, barely above a whisper, I was scared. I frowned. Of what? Of settling. Of not having the life I always dreamed of. I thought if I was with Lucas, I'd have everything. And now? Now I have nothing. She wasn't lying. Lucas was gone. My parents were humiliated. The future she had built in her head had crumbled before her eyes. And now, she wanted a second chance. With me. So what? I asked, my voice cold. You want me to come back? To pretend none of this happened? You think I'm that pathetic? No, she said quickly. I want to fix this. You can't. She let out a shaky breath. I know. I rubbed a hand over my face. So why are you calling me, Sienna? Because I lost everything, and you're the only one who ever really cared about me. You're the only person who... Her voice cracked. I don't know what to do, okay? I closed my eyes. For a second, just a second, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered. I remembered the way she had smirked when she whispered that ultimatum in my ear. I remembered how she had turned to Lucas without hesitation. I remembered how she had stood there and let my family choose him over me. And suddenly, there was nothing left in me to give her. I know what you should do, Sienna. What? Move on. Like I did. Silence. Then she whispered, Is that really it? Yeah. And then, before she could say anything else, I ended the call. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the city lights, the night air cool against my skin. That was it. That was the last thread. Sienna was gone. Lucas was gone. And I was free. I wasn't going to waste another second on people who had proven they weren't worth it. I turned my phone off, slid it into my pocket, and walked away. This time, toward a future that was truly mine. I didn't wake up the next morning feeling different. There was no grand epiphany, no cinematic moment where I stared into the mirror and saw a completely transformed man. No, it was more subtle than that. Like the weight I had carried for years had finally started to lift, one feather at a time. For the first time in years, I had no one to answer to but myself. No fiancé expecting me to finance her lavish lifestyle. No brother waiting to one-up me at every turn. No parents hovering in the background, measuring my worth against a standard I was never meant to reach. It was just me. And my life. And whatever I chose to do next. I made a decision right then and there. I was done looking back. The first thing I did was block Sienna's number. I had given her the closure she wanted. I had listened to her excuses, let her voice tremble with regret, and then cut her out of my life for good. There was no point in leaving the door open, no point in waiting for her to come crawling back, hoping for one last chance to manipulate me. And Lucas? I knew he'd resurface eventually. People like him always do. They disappear just long enough to let the damage settle, then return with a new angle, a new strategy, a new lie. I wasn't worried about him. If he ever came back, I'd be ready. But my parents? That was a different story. Rewriting the rules. 2 days after the wedding that wasn't, I got a text from my father. We need to talk. Come home. I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Come home? As if nothing had happened? As if my entire life hadn't just been turned into a public scandal because of their blind devotion to Lucas. I didn't respond. But later that evening, as I sat in my apartment, staring at the untouched dinner in front of me, I realized something. This was my chance to finally set the record straight. So I went. Not as the son desperately seeking their approval. Not as the man who had been humiliated at the altar. Not as the second-place runner in a race I had never signed up for. I went as me, the man who had walked away from all of it and wasn't coming back. The last conversation. My parents' house was just as I remembered. Cold, pristine, lifeless. The kind of home that looked like it belonged in a magazine, but never really felt like anyone lived in it. I stepped inside, and my mother rushed toward me like she actually cared. "I was so worried about you," she said, reaching for my hand. I pulled back. "Don't." She blinked, stunned, then turned to my father, who sat stiffly in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Why am I here?" I asked, crossing my arms. My father leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We made a mistake." "Which one?" I asked. There were so many. His jaw tightened. My mother let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head. "You're being cruel. We just—" "Cruel?" I repeated, laughing under my breath. No, cruel was standing at my own wedding, realizing my family had chosen my brother over me. Cruel was watching you smile as Sienna humiliated me. Cruel was letting me believe, for years, that no matter what I did, I'd never be enough for you. My father shifted in his seat. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" I shot back. "Tell me something, Dad. If Lucas had gone through with it, if he had actually married Sienna, would you be sitting here telling me you made a mistake? Or would you be celebrating the fact that your better son had secured himself the perfect life?" Silence. And that was my answer. "You didn't regret what you did to me. You regretted that he did it to you." My mother's eyes welled with tears. "We just want things to go back to the way they were." I shook my head. "That's never happening." "So what now?" my father asked, his voice clipped, like he was already preparing to cut me out of the picture. "Now?" I exhaled slowly. "Now, I live my life, without you in it." My mother gasped. "You don't mean that." I looked at her, then at my father. "Yeah, I do." And then, for the last time, I walked away. A life that was truly mine. It wasn't easy, cutting them off. There were moments when I second-guessed myself. Moments when the weight of being alone pressed down on me harder than I expected. But with each passing day, I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had a career. I had dreams. I had an entire life ahead of me that no longer revolved around proving myself to people who would never see my worth. I traveled. I started investing in things for myself. I met new people, built real connections, ones not based on status, wealth, or obligation. And then, one day, I met someone new. She wasn't like Sienna. She didn't care about my bank account. She didn't play games. She was just real. And for the first time, so was I. I wasn't the man at the altar anymore. I wasn't the son who had spent his life trying to measure up. I wasn't the backup option, the second-place choice, the safety net. I was just me. And that was enough.